Hi everyone, my name is Becky Lampman, and today I'll be walking you through some of the key concepts related to the female reproductive system, a topic that's not only fascinating but also essential to understanding human biology and health. We're going to uncover everything from the basic goal of reproductive system to the difference between primary and secondary sex characteristics, the monthly hormonal cycle, oogenesis, fertilization, and even menopause. My goal is to make the material clear, relatable, and easy to remember. I'll also be using visuals throughout to help reinforce what we're discussing. So let's dive in. So let's start by looking at the big picture. Why do we even have reproductive systems? The main goal of the sexual reproductive systems is to allow for the creation of genetically unique offspring. Each parent provides half the DNA through their gametes, which are sperm and egg, which each carry half the usual number of chromosomes. When they unite during fertilization, they form a zygote with a full set of genetic material. This genetic mixing is key. It promotes genetic variation, which helps populations adapt and survive over time. So the goal isn't just reproduction, it's creating strong, diverse generations. All right, let's dive into chromosomes, those little bundles of DNA that contain all the instructions needed to build and run our bodies. Most of our body cells, called somatic cells, are diploid, meaning they have a full 46 chromosomes, 23 from mom and 23 from dad. These cells make up things like our skin, organs, and muscles. But for reproduction, we need a different setup entirely. Reproductive cells, which are sperm in males, and the eggs, or oocytes in females, are haploid, meaning they only carry 23 chromosomes each. That way, when they join during fertilization, the total adds up to the correct number of 46 chromosomes. This happens thanks to a special kind of cell division called meiosis, which cuts the chromosome number in half before reproduction. So for example, if a sperm carries 23 chromosomes, including a Y, and an egg carries 23 chromosomes, including an X, their union will result in a zygote with 46 chromosomes, including an XY pair. That combination leads to a genetic male. All right, so now that we understand why gametes carry only 23 chromosomes, let's look at how that reduction happens. This brings us to meiosis, the process that makes gametes during gametogenesis. Most body cells are diploid with 46 chromosomes, but gametes must be haploid with 23 to maintain the chromosome count across generations. Meiosis is a special type of cell division with two rounds, meiosis 1, which separates homologous chromosomes, and meiosis 2, which separates sister chromatids. This results in 4 genetically unique haploid cells from 1 diploid cell. But meiosis also creates genetic variation. In prophase 1, crossing over swaps DNA between chromosomes. And through independent assortment, chromosomes are randomly sorted into gametes. So each sperm or egg is genetically unique, and that's what drives diversity, adaptation, and evolution. Now that we understand how meiosis creates unique haploid gametes, let's take a step back and compare it to something your body does constantly, mitosis. While meiosis is all about making sperm and eggs for reproduction, mitosis handles everything else, the growth, repair, and maintenance of our body's tissues. So let's break them down side by side. Mitosis is like a copy machine. One diploid cell divides once to create 2 identical diploid cells, each with 46 chromosomes. You'll see mitosis in action in your skin, your muscles, and other non-reproductive cells. Meiosis, on the other hand, is used only for making gametes, where one diploid cell divides twice, producing 4 genetically unique haploid cells, each with 23 chromosomes. So why is this important? Because during fertilization, the sperm and egg combine to form a zygote with the correct total of 46 chromosomes. Even better, meiosis increases genetic diversity through 2 special events. Crossing over in prophase 1, where DNA is exchanged between chromosomes, and independent assortment, where chromosomes are randomly sorted into gametes. So here's a simple way to remember. Mitosis splits once with exact copies for growth and repair, and meiosis splits twice for mix and divide of reproduction and genetic variety. Now that we've covered meiosis, mitosis, and how gametes are made, let's shift our focus to where these gametes come from and how the reproductive system supports it all. We'll start by looking at the difference between the primary and secondary sex organs. Primary sex organs are the gonads, that's the testes in males and the ovaries in females. Their main job, making gametes, but they also produce the key hormones, testosterone from the testes and estrogen and progesterone from the ovaries. These hormones help drive the development of sex characteristics and help regulate the entire reproductive system. So you can think of the primary sex organs as the main production centers. They create the sex cells and the hormones that make the system function. Secondary sex organs don't make gametes, but they do all the supporting work. In females, this includes the fallopian tubes, where fertilization usually occurs, the uterus, which houses and nourishes a fertilized egg, and the vagina, which acts as the sperm entry point in the birth canal. So in short, primary organs make the gametes and hormones, and the secondary organs do the transport, the delivery, and, if fertilization happens, help support new life. Now that we've covered sex organs, let's look at primary versus secondary sex characteristics, which help us understand how the body matures for reproduction. Primary sex characteristics are the organs directly involved in reproduction. In females, ovaries, uterine tubes, the uterus, and vagina, which help produce and transport the eggs, support implantation, and allow for childbirth. These structures are present at birth, but they don't become fully functional until puberty, when hormones like estrogen and testosterone activate them. The secondary sex characteristics are the physical changes that appear during puberty. They're not directly involved in reproduction, but are triggered by those same hormones. In females, it's breast development, wider hips, fat distribution, and the start of menstruation. These changes don't produce gametes, but they signal sexual maturity and readiness for reproduction, both biologically and socially. Now that we've covered sex characteristics, let's take a look at the pelvis, specifically the difference between the true and false pelvis, which is especially important in supporting reproduction in females. The pelvis has two regions, each with a distinct role. The true pelvis is lower, narrower part, and completely enclosed by bone. It protects key organs like the uterus, the bladder, and the rectum, and during childbirth, the baby passes through this area. That's why it's called the pelvic outlet. Above it is the false pelvis, a broader, more open space that isn't fully enclosed by bone. It supports abdominal organs like parts of the intestines and helps distribute body weight to the lower limbs. So think of it like a funnel. The false pelvis is the wide top, open and supportive, and the true pelvis is the narrow bottom, protective and essential during childbirth. Now let's look at how the internal reproductive organs stay in place, because they definitely don't just float freely inside the body. Organs like the uterus, ovaries, and uterine tubes are held in position by a network of ligaments. You can think of these as flexible anchors. They keep everything aligned but still allow for movement, especially important during pregnancy when the uterus expands. The main support structure is the broad ligament, the largest and most important. Imagine a wide, thin sheet of tissue that stretches over the uterus and spans the pelvic cavity. It supports all the major reproductive organs and has three key parts: the mesosalpinx, which supports the uterine tube, the mesovarium, which holds the ovary, and the mesometrium, which connects to the uterus. The broad ligament doesn't just hold things in place, though. It also carries blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves, and acts as a supply route to these organs. Other important ligaments include the ovarian ligament, which connects the ovary to the uterus, the suspensory ligament, which isn't seen here but attaches the ovary to the pelvic wall and carries blood vessels, and the round ligament, which anchors the uterus to the front body wall and runs through the inguinal canal. Together, all these ligaments help keep the uterus centered, preventing ovary twisting and maintaining stability as the body shifts with the menstrual cycle, pregnancy, and aging. Now that we've talked about how the reproductive organs are supported by ligaments, let's zoom in and take a look at the major structures themselves. We'll start with the ovaries. These are small, almond-shaped glands located on either side of the uterus. Their primary job is to produce eggs through a process called oogenesis. Inside the ovaries are follicles, which are tiny sacs where the eggs develop and mature each month during the ovarian cycle. Once an egg is released, it's picked up by the uterine tube, also called the fallopian tube or the oviduct. This is where fertilization typically occurs, when sperm meets the egg. The uterine tube has three important regions. The infundibulum, which is the funnel-shaped opening with finger-like projections called the fimbriae that help sweep the egg in. The ampulla, which is the widest part of the tube and the most common site of fertilization. And the isthmus, which is the narrowest portion that connects directly to the uterus. Speaking of the uterus, it's a muscular, pear-shaped organ where the fertilized egg implants and a fetus develops. It has three regions: the fundus, which is the rounded top part, the body, which makes up the main central portion, and the cervix, the narrow bottom portion that opens into the vagina. The wall of the uterus also has three layers: the perimetrium, which is the outer covering, the myometrium, a thick layer of smooth muscle that contracts during labor, and the endometrium, which is the inner lining that thickens and sheds during the menstrual cycle and supports implantation when pregnancy occurs. Next is the vagina, a muscular tube that functions as the birth canal and also receives sperm during intercourse. It has rugae, or folds, that allow it to stretch. The vagina opens to the outside world through the vulva, which includes the labia majora, labia minora, and the clitoris. It also has the skein glands, the urethral opening, and the vestibule. And while not shown in this image are the fourchette and the perineum, they are located just between the vaginal opening and the anus. And finally, while not part of the internal reproductive tract, the breasts are incredibly important accessory organs for supporting baby after birth. Inside the breasts are mammary glands, which are divided into lobes, and each lobe contains alveoli. They're the tiny sacs that produce milk. The milk travels through lactiferous ducts, which are empty at the nipple. These organs together play a remarkable coordinated role, from ovulation to fertilization to pregnancy, birth, and even feeding a newborn. Now let's talk about oogenesis, the process of egg formation in the female body. It actually starts before birth. While still in the womb, a baby girl's ovaries produce oogonia, diploid cells that begin meiosis but pause in prophase 1, becoming primary oocytes. At birth, she has about 1 to 2 million of them. From puberty to menopause, 1 oocyte per month resumes meiosis, producing a secondary oocyte released during ovulation and a polar body, which degenerates. If fertilization occurs, meiosis finishes and a mature ovum is formed. If not, the oocyte breaks down. Unlike males, females are born with all their eggs, but only about 400 to 500 will ever fully mature. After ovulation, the oocyte is swept into the uterine tube by the fimbriae and enters the infundibulum, travels through the ampulla, and then the isthmus before reaching the uterus. If fertilized, the zygote may implant in the endometrium. If not, it's shed during menstruation. To review this process visually, you can check out the 7-minute oogenesis video linked on my references page and shown here. Now that we understand how oocytes form, let's talk about the environment in which they mature, the follicles. Every egg matures inside a follicle, which is a fluid-filled structure in the ovary that supports and nourishes the developing oocyte. Follicular development happens in stages, and each stage brings the egg closer to ovulation. We begin with the primordial follicle. This is the earliest stage, a dormant structure that contains a primary oocyte arrested in meiosis 1. Think of it like an egg in deep sleep. When it's recruited for maturation, usually starting at puberty, it becomes a primary follicle. The oocyte begins to grow, and the surrounding cells, called granulosa cells, multiply and start forming layers. Next is the secondary follicle, where fluid-filled spaces start forming between the cells and the follicle becomes hormonally active. Then comes the mature follicle, also known as the Graafian follicle. This is the follicle that's ready to burst and release the egg during ovulation. It's large, filled with fluid, and the oocyte sits at the edge, surrounded by a protective layer called the corona radiata. Once the egg is released, the leftover follicle doesn't just disappear. It transforms into a new structure called the corpus luteum. The structure plays a major role in the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle, secreting progesterone to prepare the uterus for a possible pregnancy. If fertilization doesn't occur, the corpus luteum degenerates and becomes a scar-like body called the corpus albicans. So, follicular development isn't just about egg release. It's about preparing the body hormonally for the next step, fertilization and possible pregnancy. Now that we've followed the oocyte's journey from ovary to uterus, let's look at how birth control can disrupt this process. Most methods work by altering the ovarian and uterine cycles. Hormonal birth control, like pills, patches, or implants, prevent ovulation by maintaining steady hormone levels that block the LH surge, so no egg is released. It also thickens cervical mucus, making it harder for sperm to reach the egg. IUDs work differently. Hormonal IUDs thicken cervical mucus and may stop ovulation altogether, where copper IUDs create a toxic environment for sperm and prevent implantation. These methods are effective because they act at multiple stages, preventing ovulation, blocking sperm, and altering the uterine lining. All right, everybody's favorite topic. Let's take a moment to walk through the monthly female cycle and how it's guided by the body's hormones from start to finish. It all begins in the brain, where the hypothalamus releases a hormone called GnRH, or gonadotropin-releasing hormone. GnRH signals the anterior pituitary to release two more hormones, FSH, or follicle-stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. FSH plays a key role in helping follicles in the ovary grow and mature. Each follicle contains an oocyte, or an immature egg. As the follicle grows, it begins producing estrogen, which helps rebuild the stratum functionalis, the functional layer of the uterine lining. This rebuilding happens during the proliferative phase of the uterine cycle. Once estrogen levels peak, the brain responds by triggering a surge of LH, which leads to ovulation, or the release of a mature oocyte from the ovary. After ovulation, the leftover follicle transforms into the corpus luteum, which begins producing progesterone. Progesterone's main role is to maintain the uterine lining during the secretory phase, preparing the uterus for potential implantation. If fertilization occurs and a zygote begins forming, the developing embryo will release human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. This hormone signals the corpus luteum to continue producing progesterone, which is crucial for supporting early pregnancy and preventing the uterine lining from breaking down. If pregnancy doesn't occur, levels of estrogen and progesterone fall, the stratum functionalis breaks down, and menses begins, marking the start of a new cycle. Now, while this is happening in the uterus, the ovarian cycle is unfolding in three main phases: the follicular phase, where the follicle grows and estrogen rises; ovulation, where the egg is released; and the luteal phase, where the corpus luteum produces progesterone. The uterine cycle mirrors this with its own three phases: menses, where the lining is shed; the proliferative phase, where estrogen rebuilds it; and the secretory phase, where progesterone maintains it. We also see other hormones at work. Inhibin helps regulate how much FSH is released, keeping the cycle in balance. And although present at lower levels in females, testosterone produced by the ovaries supports libido and plays a minor role in the overall process. Altogether, the female monthly cycle is a beautifully coordinated event. Hormonal signals from the brain, ovaries, and the uterus work together to prepare the body each month for the possibility of a pregnancy. Let's wrap up the monthly cycle by talking about menopause, the natural end of a woman's reproductive years. It typically occurs between ages 45 and 55 when the ovaries stop producing enough estrogen and progesterone, causing menstrual cycles to cease permanently. Before menopause, many experience perimenopause, marked by irregular periods and reduced fertility due to fewer viable eggs and fluctuating hormones. Common symptoms include hot flashes, mood swings, sleep issues, and vaginal dryness. While menopause is a normal part of aging, its effects vary. Some women manage symptoms with hormone therapy or lifestyle changes like diet, exercise, and stress management. Now that we've discussed menopause, the natural end of the female reproductive cycle, let's shift focus to the beginning of human life: fertilization. Fertilization is the moment when a sperm cell successfully merges with an oocyte, initiating the development of a new individual. It takes place in the ampulla of the uterine tube, which is the usual site of fertilization. The process begins where enzymes from the sperm's acrosome digest the outer layer surrounding the egg. Once one sperm penetrates the oocyte, the cortical reaction is triggered. This is the fast, protective mechanism that prevents polyspermy, or entry of multiple sperm, by hardening and forming the fertilization membrane. After this, the male and female pronuclei, each containing half of the genetic material, fuse to form a zygote, or a single diploid cell. This marks the very first stage of new human life. This entire process, from acrosomal reaction to zygote formation, represents the successful completion of gametogenesis and the transition from two haploid gametes to a diploid organism. Once fertilization has occurred and the zygote is formed, the next amazing journey begins: early embryonic development. The zygote starts dividing almost immediately through a process called cleavage. These are rapid mitotic divisions that don't increase the overall size of the cell mass, but instead create more and more cells. About 3 to 4 days after fertilization, the embryo becomes a morula, which is essentially a solid ball of cells. As it continues to grow, fluid begins to accumulate inside, forming a hollow structure known as a blastocyst. Around day 5 to 6, the blastocyst reaches the uterus and begins the process of implantation into the endometrium. This step is crucial because the blastocyst needs nutrients and support to continue developing. Once implantation is successful, the blastocyst begins forming the structures necessary for embryonic development, including the placenta and the embryo itself. So from a single fertilized cell, we now have a structure that's ready to become a fully developed human. All right, everyone, that brings us to the end of our journey through the female reproductive system. We've covered a lot today, from chromosomes and gametogenesis to the hormones that guide the menstrual cycle, the ligaments that support the organs, the pathways of fertilization, and even the incredible changes that come with menopause and the early embryonic development. The reproductive system is complex, but it's also beautifully coordinated, and understanding it is essential not just for exams, but for real-life health and self-awareness. I hope this presentation helped make the content more approachable and easier to remember. If you have any questions, please feel free to review my references page and the included transcript of today's lesson. Thanks for your attention. You've all been awesome listeners.